So who do you want to be? Our very first discussion in our course asked you to describe who you think you are. And then we looked at who we are as participants in a humanities course in creativity. And now I want you to think about who you want to be. Or another way of looking at that is, what sort of life do you want for yourself? What is your ideal life? If you think about all the things you do on a daily basis, the reasons why you choose to spend your time doing certain things, whether it's your schoolwork or your job or spending time with your family, it's because apparently you have some sort of ideal life that you are organizing your time around, right? It's the life that, the story that you have in your head about what it is you ultimately value. So what is it? What is it that you have in your head that you ultimately value? What sort of life do you really want for yourself? Do you maybe have the typical American dream as your ultimate ideal life, where you imagine yourself having a family and a house and cars, maybe a dog in the yard? Do you see yourself ideally within a particular role, right, within a family? Is that your ideal life, or are you somebody that wants to have more freedom and more free time and perhaps being able to be more social and enjoy the company of friends? Maybe that's your ideal life. What is it? I want you to spend some time thinking about this. What is it that you want to create? What type of life do you want to create for yourself? The way we're going to do that is with an activity, and the activity is, I want you to take a look at 5 various dimensions of living a human life. And I want you to think about at least 3 5-year goals that you would like to achieve for each of these dimensions. So for instance, maybe you have a certain goal to have graduated with a certain degree, okay, within 5 years. Maybe you have a goal to have a certain amount in your savings account within 5 years, or to have a certain type of job within 5 years. Maybe you have a goal to be within, or to be in a committed relationship within 5 years, or to still be in your current relationship within 5 years. Maybe you have certain goals with regards to the time you spend with your family, or in terms of mending with certain relationships that maybe have been broken or torn apart within your family. Maybe you have certain goals with regards to your physical well-being, your health. Maybe you have specific blood pressure goals or weight goals, or maybe you have certain goals in terms of how much time to spend with self-care, right? And taking care of your own soul and your own psychology. Maybe more time to meditate, or more time to take long walks in the park, or things that would be useful to your psychological well-being. I want you specifically to think about goals with regards to your relationship to your community. Think about ways in which you can contribute to the betterment of those around you. So the idea is, for each of these 5 dimensions of your life, I want you to come up with at least three different goals. So you'll have 15 in total. And for each of those goals, I'd like them to be specific. So, if you have certain goals with regards to your weight, don't just say, I'd like to lose weight within 5 years. Like, how much would you like to lose, or what would be the ideal weight for you? Don't just say, I'd like to have more money. How much specifically would you like to have in savings? Or don't just say you'd like to, do better for the environment, but specifically, what would you like to do? Would you like to cut down on specific uses of certain types of materials? Would you like to participate in nonprofit organizations and spend more of your hours helping out in that way? So be specific. And then I want you to be realistic. So if your favorite company is Disney and you really want to eventually work for them, it may be unrealistic to see yourself as the CEO within 5 years, but perhaps you can have an optimistic goal of having a certain type of position that might be more reasonable, right? Again, I don't want to temper your enthusiasm, so definitely dream and dream big. But it may not be very realistic to say to yourself that you want to have 3 arms so that you can do more within 5 years, right? Sure, that might help with your physical and psychological well-being to have 3 arms, but not very realistic to grow a 3rd arm, right? So 3 specific, realistic goals for each of these 5 dimensions of your life. Okay, so why is it important to think about this? Well, it should be obvious, right? Because as we've been looking at within our descriptions of the ordinary world, we don't often think about these things, right? If you remember Plato's allegory of the cave, we often don't think about the assumptions we have about what we want, what life is like, how to achieve what it is that we value, right? Plato says that we're often trapped just believing these shadows, right? The false realities that are provided to us by others. So if you think about how you spend your time, how you spend your days, what you prioritize, did you actually really choose those things, or did somehow they become ingrained into you? If we take a look at somebody like Truman, we see that he grows up and he is completely engulfed by this world created by somebody else. And as a result of growing up within this world, everything that he's taught by the people around him, he accepts as reality. How to live his life, what he should want out of it, where he should spend his time. I mean, he said that I think he's selling insurance within the company, right? So why did he eventually want to sell insurance? Why did he eventually want to marry Meryl? Why did he eventually want to live in whatever house he's living in? A lot of that, if not most of it, was the result of outside forces, right, that dictated his ordinary world. If we take a look, he is literally trapped on an island, to go back to the analogy from our book, right? Like the villagers trapped on their island, he is literally trapped in his island. That's his ordinary world, and all he knows about reality is that island. And a lot of the things he does believe about that reality, comes from sources that he doesn't think are necessarily, out to get him. This person that he thinks is his mom, this person that he thinks is his wife, his best friend, all of these sources that he takes for granted as being on his side, right? They are the sources that help define his ordinary world. So when we think about how it is that we decide on what we want to do with ourselves and where we want to go, it may not be so obvious to you that you're living in a Truman-like ordinary world, Truman-like cave, but you have to ask yourself, well, who is it that has influenced me? What sorts of things have influenced me? How much time have I thought about questioning that reality, right? The reality of what I value and where I want to go. Let's take a look at Truman's ordinary world. How would you describe it? How would you describe his ordinary world? Well, you might say things like it's predictable, isn't it? You might say things like it's preordained. It's all the people all around him do the same sorts of things, and nobody really is making a choice per se on what to do, because it's kind of written and they're being directed to follow certain lines. Does that sound familiar at all? To have or to live in a world where things seem to be on habit, on a pattern, where people kind of just do kind of what they're told. And even sometimes when people rebel, you might even be able to show where that rebellion comes from, right? So a lot of our behavior seems to parallel, or a lot of our the things that make up our ordinary world seems to parallel what Truman goes through. How would you describe these people's ordinary worlds? So here's Truman. He goes to work, he makes a living, he provides for his family, he has a wife, he has a normal job. Again, that seems like the ordinary world for a lot of us. These people, right, they're following exactly what they're being told to do by the director, by the screenwriters, But let's think a little bit different level here. These actors, think about their ordinary world. Think about what they value in life. That they're okay spending their time as extras on a show where they don't really say anything, where they don't get to do anything really interesting. They're just there, right? That's sort of what extras are. They're just there. They don't move plot forward. They're not critical to the story. They're just there. So if you're an actor and you get this role, what is it that you value? And then think about the fact that they're on a show that is, manipulative and that is taking advantage of this guy named Truman. So what is it that these actors value? If they're willing to be complicit in a show that's literally enslaving somebody, that's literally lying and deceiving somebody, that's manipulating their emotions, that doesn't give them freedom, what does it say about their ordinary world, the actor's ordinary world, that they're okay with that in order to be a extra, right, in this TV show? Or how about this person? What's his ordinary world? Think about what he believes, what he values. Think about how he manipulates Truman and the way he does it and the joy he gets from doing it. Right? What is it that he wants out of life? What's his ordinary world? Or let's take it even a step further. What about these people? All of these individuals who are watching the show, right? What's their ordinary world like? What is it that they believe is about what life is about and what they should want out of it and where they should go? I mean, this person seems to be in their bathtub in the 24/7. What is it that he wants out of his life? How does he think a good life is supposed to be attained if he's spending all of his time staring at this TV, even falling asleep in front of this TV watching Truman's life? Here are all these people in the bar that have this show on 24/7, because if you didn't notice, this was the Truman Bar. So there is a bar that's dedicated to, the show. What is it that they value? What is it that they believe about how they should live their lives? That the entire time they're in this bar, they're literally watching this show, rather than maybe enjoying each other's company and learning about one another and engaging in each other's problems to help, be empathetic and compassionate. They're totally and completely engaged with Truman. And then, do you remember what happens when the show ends? When the literal Truman Show is over? These two asked, okay, what's next? What's on next? Think about that sort of life. Are they actually living life? How are they engaged in it? What's their ordinary world like? As Plato mentioned, we often don't question, right, our reality. And seemingly their reality is all about being engaged in watching this form of entertainment. And again, we can go back to the idea of being complicit in the apparent immorality of the show, right? They're so engaged and enthralled by the drama and the entertainment that they seem to be oblivious to how awful Truman's being treated. So what's their ordinary world like? So oftentimes it takes something dramatic in order to wake us up, in order for us to turn around in our caves, right? In order for us to take the step outside of our ordinary world. So in addition to the fact that we don't often think about it, another reason you may want to think about it is because life is not guaranteed, right? At any moment, things could dramatically change for you, and even to the extent that your life may be cut short. So these are photographs of people who died in a recent helicopter crash. Right? You may be familiar with this person who died in that crash. And it's a wake-up call for a lot of people, realizing that life isn't, never ending. And that if you don't stop to think about where it is you want to go, what it is you ultimately value, then, you have to ask yourself, well, are you actually living, right? Because if you're not choosing what you want, and if you're not choosing where you want to go, then your choices probably come from some other source, some other place, and not yourself. So when we take a look at Plato's cave, this is part of the allegory. These people that are in the cave, they don't really seem to struggle very hard. They don't really seem to have much of a desire to leave, because this is their life. This is what they're used to. This is what they believe to be real, is all the shadows. So what is there to question? What is there to look into? Because for all they know, the world is just the shadows. And that leads us to our creative mind spotlight for this lecture, Martin Luther King. And you may want to ask yourself, well, why or how does Plato's allegory of the cave lead us to Martin Luther King? Well, Martin Luther King was a minister and an activist. Hopefully you're all familiar with Martin Luther King. And one of the things that he realized about creating social change, right? Because if you're not familiar, Martin Luther King was a civil rights activist that helped usher in new laws, new civil rights laws to make to bring about legislative change to help with inequality. So Martin Luther King, one of the things he realized was that in order to create change within the legal system, you might have to go against your natural instincts about how to create that sort of change. So for most of American history, right, minorities have been brutalized and ridiculed and made to feel like outsiders. The laws seem to propagate that, right? Segregation laws and laws that prohibit people from voting, laws that prohibit certain people from gaining property. So it's kind of hard to live equally when you don't have equal opportunity. So lots of people tried to fight back, right? Martin Luther King realized that in order to change laws, literal fighting may not be the best course of action. So what did he decide to do? Well, his approach was referred to as nonviolent direct action. So if somebody beats you because of your skin color, somebody spits on you because of your ethnicity, what's the natural instinct? Well, the natural instinct is to fight back, to spit back, to punch back. Martin Luther King realized that, the best approach may not be to do those sorts of things, but to have or to do nonviolent direct action. That entailed being trained that when people hit you and spat at you and cursed you and called you derogatory names, you would not respond in kind. That's hard to do. Not only that, but part of the strategy was to go into the worst of worst racist towns where he knew him and other protesters would be beaten and ridiculed and called names. He would go to those places intentionally where he knew he'd be met with violence. That seems insane. That could be a completely irrational thing to do. Why would you want to put yourself in harm's way? Well, what he realized was that in order to change legislation, you need to change the minds of the American people. And for a lot of people, they were unaware, and not just consciously, but emotionally, they didn't resonate with the harms that were being perpetuated against African Americans within the country. They were caught in their caves. Lots of Americans weren't aware of how bad it was, right? Because think about what the stuff that you focus on, right? We're mostly focused on our own lives, trying to survive and make it, for ourselves. Well, Martin Luther King would bring himself and his protesters to these towns, and they would be beaten and brutalized, and the media would be there to capture it. And then as a result, this would be broadcast all over the nation, and people actually got to see how bad it was. He woke them up. He called them to leave behind the shadows to see what else is out there in the world. And when you get the American people galvanized, realizing that change needs to happen, then change in legislation happened. But just think about how counterintuitive this is. Think about how he had to leave behind the ordinary world that says you fight back when somebody tries to harm you, right? Think about how he had to literally act as one of Plato's philosophers, come back down into the cave and tell people, look outside, turn around. There's more to life than what you are seeing right now. So in this sense, it's kind of important to question what it is we want out of life, to question where it is we want to go. One, to make sure it's where we want to go and not where somebody else wants us to go, right? It's your life, so where is it that you want to eventually be in it? And two, well, it's useful to reevaluate what it is you think you value, because that actually might change over time. As you grow and mature, you might start to value different things. And if we never question it, we get stuck in our caves, not questioning what it is we think we should want. Well, we may end up in places that we eventually do not want to be in. So, what type of person do you want to be? If we take a look again at all of these people, caught in their caves, caught in their ordinary worlds, how often do they question where it is they want to be? One question you might want to ask yourself is, why is it so hard to leave? Why is it so hard for a lot of people to leave their ordinary worlds behind? All those people we just looked at in the movie, they never seemed to question it other than Truman himself. So why would we get stuck here in this ordinary world, in our islands? That's what we'll talk about in our next lecture.